So what you've just seen is video footage of 50-year-old Auriol Grey. Now on the 24th of February 2023, she was convicted of an offence of unlawful act manslaughter for causing the death of 77-year-old cyclist Celia Ward. And as you can see from the footage, she shouted and waved her hand at Mrs. Ward, causing her to go onto the road where she was struck and killed by a car. Now, following her conviction, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison on the 2nd of March 2023. Now, on the 8th of May 2024, so last week at the time of recording this video, Auriol Grey's conviction was quashed and she was freed from prison and will face no further action in relation to this incident. Now in this video I'm going to explain why she won her appeal by going through the judgment from the Court of Appeal, which was released on the 8th of May 2024. Welcome to my channel, Andy on Crime, where I talk about high profile criminal cases and other aspects of criminal law in England and Wales. With all that being said, let's get into the video. Now, before I get into the specifics of this case, I just want to explain some basics about appealing your conviction. Now, if you are a frequent viewer of videos on my channel, then you may have seen my video on Lucy Letby's appeal, where I explained the appeals process in some detail. But in really simple terms, the only ground for appealing your conviction in England and Wales is that your conviction was unsafe. What does that mean, I hear you ask? Well, it means that there was something wrong in the trial process, which means the basis on which someone was convicted was unsafe, and therefore the defendant did not have a fair trial. So the conviction must be quashed and either a retrial held or the case stops altogether. Now, something wrong with the case could include evidence being wrongly excluded or admitted, or, as you'll hear more of in this video, that the directions from the judge to the jury were wrong and or misleading. And something else that I want to quickly touch upon, which is relevant to this case, are the elements of the offence of unlawful act manslaughter, which are that the defendant committed an unlawful act, that unlawful act was a crime, and the defendant's unlawful act was a significant cause of the death of the deceased. So just breaking that down, and you'll see that the key phrase here is the term unlawful act. Now, as a way of explaining this, take person A who is in an argument with person B outside of a pub. Person A then pushes person B, who trips, falls and hits his head on the pavement, causing person B's death. Now, person A is not guilty of murder because he does not intend to kill or cause person B really serious harm, so he cannot be convicted of murder. But unless he can show that he was acting in self-defence, then he would be guilty of unlawful act manslaughter. He has committed an unlawful act, in this case the offence of battery, which is the infliction of unlawful personal force upon another person. And that offence of battery was a crime, and the battery, i.e. the push, was a significant cause of death of the deceased. Now, why I've taken some time to explain this is that in the case of Auriol Grey, the appeal centred round what exactly was the unlawful act or the base offence for which she was subsequently convicted of unlawful act manslaughter. I'm now going to turn to Auriol Grey's appeal, and I've linked the full judgment in the description if you want to read it, but I'm going to take you through some excerpts from the judgment to explain why the conviction was quashed, and you'll see various paragraphs from the judgment appearing on screen throughout this part of the video. Now, as outlined at paragraph 6, the prosecution's case against Auriol Grey, who I'll also refer to as the appellant throughout this video, her hostile reaction to Mrs. Ward cycling on the pavement was unlawful, the prosecution stated, and led to her death. And the prosecution relied on the CCTV footage, which you've seen at the start of this video, as showing Mrs. Grey's actions, and this was one of the key pieces of evidence in the case. Now, Mrs. Grey's defence was that she perceived Mrs. Ward to be coming towards her suddenly at speed, and her arm motion was as a result of fearing that she would be hit. Now, at paragraph 11, the Court of Appeal makes its first pretty staggering comment, which was that the prosecution now, i.e. at the appeal, accepted that there was no evidence that Mrs. Grey had made any physical contact with Mrs. Ward. And furthermore, the judge at this point was criticised in their summing up to the jury. At paragraph 13, the Court of Appeal outlines the judge's legal directions to the jury. Now, this is usually a written document which tells the jury how to approach the elements of the offences that they are dealing with when coming to a verdict. Now, the key omission in the judge's legal directions here is that there is no reference whatsoever to the jury being asked to consider whether they are sure that the appellant committed some kind of lawful act, such as battery. Remember, I said when I talked about the elements of the offence that a person must commit an unlawful act in order to be convicted of unlawful act manslaughter. At paragraph 14, building on what I have just said, the appellant's legal representatives stated that the judge failed to specify what exactly was the unlawful act that the appellant was supposed to have committed. And they went further and said that no one, including the judge or trial counsel on both sides, seemed to have noticed this fundamental error. Now, the respondent, which is the prosecution in this case, at paragraph 16, whilst accepting that the appellant could not have committed a battery, stated that the jury would nonetheless have found that a common assault would have been committed. Now, as a quick explainer, common assault, unlike battery, requires no physical contact to take place. It is causing a person to apprehend the immediate infliction of unlawful personal force. The person must also intend or be reckless to their words or actions in causing a person to apprehend the force. So saying something like, "I'm going to break your leg," would likely constitute an offence of common assault. The respondent stated that if the jury had found that the appellant had committed common assault, then that would constitute an unlawful act, and the conviction, therefore, would not be unsafe. The Court of Appeal, however, rejected this submission, stating that the judge's failure to provide any legal directions on common assault meant that the jury could not be aware of the elements of that offence that must be proven. The judge, in their legal directions, only addressed accident or self-defence. In addressing whether or not this was an accident, the Court of Appeal stated that this could not be substituted for the failure of the legal directions to invite the jury to consider whether they were sure that the elements of common assault were made out. And they went on to say that the appellant's gesturing were not accidental in the sense that the movement of her arm was not involuntary. So how could the jury have found that this could have been an accident? With regards to self-defence, the Court of Appeal said that the judge should have asked the jury whether or not the offence of common assault was made out before considering the defence of self-defence. This is because self-defence only arises if the prosecution prove that a common assault took place, not the other way round, which is what the judge appeared to be doing. Ultimately, the Court of Appeal found that the prosecution case, taken at its highest, was that Mrs. Ward perhaps apprehended a blow might be inbound. Now, this is insufficient for a conviction, as the jury has to be sure that a common assault took place. Now, this is clearly of little comfort for Mrs. Ward's family, who have lost a loved one, and I have huge sympathy for them. But the issue in this case seems to be that there was no basis on which a jury could be sure that Mrs. Grey's actions constituted common assault, which provides the base offence for unlawful act manslaughter. And the Court of Appeal at paragraph 36 concluded that the judge's legal directions contained fundamental and material misdirections of the law, which stemmed from a failure from all parties to identify the issues to be determined by the jury. And as a result, the appeal was allowed and Mrs. Grey's conviction was quashed.